20 أكتوبر 2005.
Good afternoon. You are watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. Speaker Nabih Berri says he is hopeful the delayed dialogue between the Future Movement and Hezbollah will kick off before the end of the year. MP Michel Aoun says families of captive servicemen should be included in the government's negotiations to release the hostages. And in response to the food safety scandal, a training center for food safety measures is inaugurated in Beirut. Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri says he is hopeful that the delayed dialogue between Hezbollah and the Future Movement will kick-start before the end of the year. This is according to legislators who visited him at the Ain Atine residence today. The Speaker was briefed by the Parliament's committee tasked with drafting a new electoral law on the outcome of its deliberations and the Lebanese force's decision to suspend its participation in the group. Berri reiterated his stance regarding the need to elect a new president before any electoral draft law is approved in Parliament. Commenting on the issue of the 25 Lebanese servicemen held captive by Nusra Front and ISIS militants, Berri was quoted as saying that the matter should be handled exclusively by the experts, namely the security authorities. MP Michel Aoun has called for including a representative of the families of captive servicemen in the government's crisis cell, which is handling the negotiations to secure their release. Aoun insisted that the hostages' families have the right to be updated on both good and bad news, adding that such rights are stipulated by international law. The lawmaker also suggested that the army and police commands assign an officer from each institutions to follow up with the families and keep them informed about the progress of the negotiations. Industry Minister Hussein Haj Hassan has inaugurated a new training center by the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Beirut that will teach Lebanon's companies about food safety measures. Food safety has been highlighted since Health Minister Wael Abu Fahour launched a crackdown on dangerous practice in the food industry, closing several factories and slaughterhouses. Abu Fahour spoke at the event, stressing that his campaign never aimed at shaming any institution or generalizing accusations against all companies. As part of the food safety campaign, all factories will now be obliged to send their workers to free but mandatory training on food safety. Foreign Minister Gibran Bassil has signed a free trade agreement between Lebanon and the Mercosur countries in Latin America, stressing on the importance to maintain good relations with the continent. The Memorandum of Understanding, which Bassil signed in Panama, Argentina, facilitates trade between Lebanon and the sub-regional bloc, which includes Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay and Venezuela, making it the world's 5th largest economic bloc. The agreement was signed during the 47th ministerial meeting for the group, which also includes associate member states and 2 observer states. Bassil, who began his speech in Spanish, stressed on the good relations between Lebanon and the Latin American countries, which has about 12 million Lebanese immigrants. Finance Minister Ali Hassan Khalil has pressed ahead with his promised crackdown on corruption in Lebanon, saying he has referred more names of corruption suspects to the financial prosecutor and stressing that no political cover will be provided to those robbing the state and its citizens. In a news conference announcing that his ministry will continue its crackdown on public sector corruption, Khalil vowed to restore the people's confidence in state institutions, warning no criminal will be immune to prosecution. The announcement comes after Khalil earlier said that investigations were launched into a number of alleged corruption cases within the real estate sector. The UN Security Council is scheduled to vote on a resolution extending cross-border delivery of humanitarian aid to Syrians in rebel-held areas in desperate need of food and medicine without government approval. UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Valerie Amos described the desperate need in Syria for humanitarian assistance and urged the Council to extend humanitarian aid.
Mr. President, I regret to inform the Council that 10 months later, the Council's strong demands have gone unheard. The parties to the conflict continue to ignore the most basic principles of humanity. In many parts of Syria, the level of violence has worsened, with civilians continuing to pay heavily with loss of life, serious injuries, psychological trauma, ongoing and recurring displacement, and massive damage to property and infrastructure. We have run out of words to fully explain the brutality, violence, and callous disregard for human life, which is a hallmark of this crisis. The international community has become numb to its impact with the vast numbers, regional reach, and sense of political impasse. Resolution 2139 explicitly condemns grave violations and abuses committed against children and condemns all forms of sexual and gender-based violence. Yet today, Syria is one of the most dangerous places on earth to be a child. Children have been murdered, tortured, and subjected to sexual violence by all parties to the conflict. Reports of children killed or publicly executed, crucified, beheaded, and stoned to death, particularly by ISIL, have increased in recent months. Millions of children have been traumatized by the horrors they have been forced to witness. In adopting Resolution 2139, this Council committed itself and the wider international community to the well-being and the protection of the people of Syria. Today, I appeal again to Council members to ensure that the parties heed its call and comply with Resolution 2139 in its entirety.
Coming up next, Pope Francis celebrates his 78th birthday today. More details after the break. Welcome back. Pakistanis woke up to a nation in grief today as the country marks the first of 3 days of mourning in memorial of the 141 school children and teachers killed in a Taliban attack on a school in the western city of Peshawar. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif called a multi-party conference in Peshawar to discuss the state response to the attack, the worst in Pakistan's recent history. During the meeting, Pakistan's years-long moratorium on the death penalty in the country was lifted. The Tehreek-e-Taliban, also known as the Pakistani Taliban, released a statement saying the adult sons of military personnel and members of the military had been killed in the raid, warning civilians to distance themselves from security personnel or be killed alongside them. The attack was condemned across the world by figures such as Ban Ki-moon, John Kerry, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Malala Yousafzai.
The news of the brazen murder of more than 120 innocent students in Peshawar is devastating. And as a father, I know exactly how hard it is when you send kids out of the house into the world, to school or anywhere, and particularly in today's world. Mothers and fathers send their kids to school to learn and to be safe and to dream and to find opportunity. And particularly at this military school in Pakistan, they sent their kids there with the hope and dreams of serving their country. Instead, today they are gone, wiped away by Taliban assassins who serve a dark and almost medieval vision. This act of terror angers and shakes all people of conscience, and we condemn it in the strongest terms possible.
My family and I are heartbroken after hearing the news that more than 100 innocent children and teachers have lost their lives in this recent attack on a school in Peshawar. And we stand with all those families and all those children who are injured right now and who are suffering through this big trauma. And now it is time that we unite, and I call upon the international community, leaders in Pakistan, all political parties and everyone, that we should stand up together and fight against terrorism, and we should make sure that every child gets safe and quality education.
The European Union lower court ruling has decided to take Palestinian group Hamas off the terrorist organization's list. The court found that the inclusion had been based not on an examination of Hamas's actions, but on factual imputations derived from the press and the internet. The judges specified that the move was not a reassessment of Hamas's classification as a terrorist group, and funding freeze on the group will continue for now. Responding to the ruling, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Hamas should be put back on the list immediately. Still in the Middle East, Palestinian officials have said they will press ahead with a bid for statehood at the UN today. despite a warning that the U.S. will block the move. The draft resolution, to be submitted by Jordan on behalf of the Palestinian Authority, will call for withdrawal of Israeli troops from occupied Palestinian territory within 2 years and a return to negotiations with a view to achieving a two-state solution. Palestinians officials meeting U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry at talks in London received a warning that the U.S. will veto the resolution, but decided to press ahead with a mostly symbolic move.
This is not the end of the story as far as the Palestinians are concerned. One has to keep in mind that going to the Security Council has been, from a Palestinian point of view, given their plan only as a first step. The next step would be, after that, no matter what happens in the Security Council, is to apply for membership of various councils, committees of the United Nations. And these will also not be welcomed by Israel. In fact, Israel most likely will take some steps as a form of punishment for the Palestinian Authority. We are at a very difficult and critical moment, but the political vacuum that exists now and has existed at least since January 2014, after the failure of the efforts of Secretary Kerry, ultimately will lead to some conflagration, some form of conflict on the ground. Everybody understands that.
Authorities in Kosovo have stepped up efforts to crack down on growing support for ISIS. More than 40 suspects have already been swept up in raids across the Balkan state, either for fighting alongside Islamic State fighters in Iraq and Syria or encouraging others to do so. Kosovo's connection to the war in the Middle East gained global attention in October when authorities secured the release of an 8-year-old Kosovar boy whose father had taken with him to Syria. The boy was gone for 5 months and sparked a major campaign to secure his release.
Be that 100 or 200 or even 5 people went to sleep one night as sane people and then woke up tomorrow as terrorists. Somebody worked with these people. Somebody tried to convince these people that this is the right way. And those people are here.
Russia has failed to halt the collapse of the ruble, leaving President Vladimir Putin facing a full-blown currency crisis that could weaken his grip on power. The embattled currency extended a week of catastrophic losses by dropping 4% at the opening of trading in Moscow today. Labeled the world's worst-performing currency, the ruble has lost more than 50% of its value this year. It traded at 70.7 per dollar this morning, on 4% lower than at the closing yesterday. Thousands of people sang Happy Birthday and danced a mass tango to celebrate the birthday of the first Latin American Pope. Argentinian Pope Francis was born in the birthplace of the tango on December 17th of 1936. Today he heard versions of Happy Birthday in Spanish, Italian and other languages as he was driven through St. Peter's Square to start his weekly general audience. At the rear edge of the square, more than 2,000 people who came to Rome from all over Italy for the birthday danced in a Tango for Pope Francis event as music blared. Francis, who became Latin America's first pope when he was elected in 2013, is a fan of the dance from the land of his birth. According to figures released by the Vatican, nearly 1.2 million people have seen the Pope at outdoor general audiences this year. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our top stories. Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri says he is hopeful the delayed dialogue between the Future Movement and Hezbollah will kick off before the end of the year. MP Michel Aoun says families of captive servicemen should be included in the government's negotiations to release the hostages. And in response to the food safety scandal, a training center for food safety measures is inaugurated in Beirut. Well, that's it from me and the news team here at Future Television. Catch us again tomorrow for more updates. Take care.
يجب أن يستقيل في الساعات القادمة 20 أكتوبر 2014.